Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Your Team's Childcare Crisis. I'm Allison Ryder, Senior Project Editor of MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be moderating today's event. The program is sponsored by Northeastern University. Our speakers today are Jamie Ladge and Tim Allen. Jamie Ladge is an Associate Professor and Group Chair of Management and Organizational Development at the DeMoore McKim School of Business at Northeastern University. She's also a Distinguished Research Professor at the University of Exeter Business School. Tim Allen is the CEO of Care.com, responsible for the company's strategic direction, leadership, and growth, as well as its commitment to deliver on its mission to transform and improve how families around the world find care for all they love. We have quite a robust agenda for you all today, so let's get started. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Allison, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this webinar. You know, we've been talking about doing this for, I think, probably more than a year now, and one of my worries was maybe some of the data or the issues would no longer be relevant, and sadly, that's actually not the case. And in fact, in many respects, things have probably worsened, and I'll talk a lot about that. I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about my research, because this is something, these topics around careers and caregiving and work-life integration are things that I've been working on really for the last 19 years. And I know it's been exactly 19 years because my oldest son is 19 years old, and he was 6 months old when I started my PhD program. I never set out to study issues of caregiving and work-life integration, but really a lot of that was informed by my own personal experiences, and that really shaped my research identity. So the work that I do really centers along a lot of these issues that are showing up in these pictures here. So I set out to really start to understand pregnancy and working parent experiences, not just for mothers, but also for fathers who are navigating the transition to parenthood for the first time. I was particularly interested in how their identity changes as both professionals and parents, and how those identities of being a parent and professional influence each other. And over time, I've looked at this from a number of angles, looking at same-sex couples, looking at some racial differences, and also mental health challenges that are experienced by working parents. And what's relevant for the conversation today is to think about how societal expectations about what it means to be a good parent and professional really shape those identities even long before they might even start. And a couple years ago, I co-authored a book with a longtime colleague of mine called Maternal Optimism, and that book was really about all the different transitions that working mothers and parents in general experience. I chuckle at the name because we were very optimistic at the time. It was right before the pandemic when the book was published. I still do remain optimistic despite all the challenges that we're here to talk about today. So I really wanted to begin by talking about this caregiving crisis. What does that actually mean? And the COVID-19 pandemic obviously exposed a lot of critical challenges that a lot of people were experiencing. And I will say that these critical challenges around caregiving mean different things to different people. This is not a one-size-fits-all thing, and ultimately, different people have different impacts depending on their personal and professional circumstances. But ultimately, the core challenges really stem from issues around availability, affordability, and access to care. It's expensive to have children in this country. The average cost of childcare, according to my friends at Care.com, who did a study on this, show that it's about 10% of household income. I have 3 children, including twins, and I had twins obviously in full-time daycare at the same time, and that was about 10 to 12 years ago, and it was about $30,000 a year for each. So it's obviously, it's an expensive prospect. And while COVID-19 exposed some of these critical challenges, particularly around availability and access, the affordability issues and some of these other issues have sort of endured through all these years. There's also limitations in terms of backup care, and I should step back and say that, most families don't have access to quality care, even when it is available. And during the pandemic, the availability of childcare was pretty dire, with lots of daycare centers closing down, caregivers unwilling or unable to enter homes due to fear of getting sick, including grandparents who are often relied upon as backup care. So while the pandemic can be to blame for the lack of care and some of these other challenges, it also created a lot of unpredictability for many working parents. And it might have just been hiding in plain sight because, again, these are issues that a lot of parents experience even long before the pandemic. Childcare workers make minimum wage and often work multiple jobs. Kids get sick all the time, leading to predictability in scheduling and school hours that don't always align with how people actually work. There's always those random half days or school closings that happen within a moment's notice, and many parents often have to scramble to find backup or just juggle, working from home or taking a sick or vacation day. And then lastly, there's been some challenges around family responsive workplace supports. Not necessarily challenges, but it's certainly not a level playing field across different workplaces, and some of these programs and policies can be expensive and difficult to roll out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and I know that Tim will also be discussing what companies are doing. Clearly, especially during the pandemic, we saw lots of firms beginning to offer far more supports for working parents, but we do lag behind with what other industrialized nations offer in this regard, particularly with respect to paid time off, parental leave, and flexible work arrangements. And this is something, again, I will discuss in a few minutes, but even when companies offer it, many people don't want to take advantage of it because they often are fearful of what possible repercussions it might have on their career. Researchers like me often call this ideal worker norms, right? That you're often seen as uncommitted if you take time off or reduce your hours or need a flexible work schedule. So really the bottom line around this caregiving crisis is the fragility of infrastructure, particularly around caregiving. It's been filled with cracks all along, but the pandemic really shined a spotlight on those cracks and sent shockwaves to many families, even in the most privileged households who may have taken for granted the kind of caregiving that they did have. And not to mention, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all the things that are adding to the current caregiving crisis. We have a baby formula shortage right now and price gouging that's associated with that, more school shootings to worry about, health scares, including monkeypox, and then of course, inflation, rising food prices, gas prices, et cetera. So in many respects, it's starting to feel like being a parent is really difficult. As if it wasn't difficult before, it's becoming increasingly difficult. And it's no surprise really that we see these headlines, working parents are not okay. I started to see these headlines back in March of 2020 when the pandemic began. And I looked even, as I was preparing the slides for this presentation, and these headlines still continue, to really make the spotlight in a lot of these headlines, and because parents are not okay. And I'm going to talk a lot about that and what this means in practice. So in practice, and this is something that I studied with a group of collaborators at Northeastern, we really looked at, what was going on here, at least during the pandemic, and how this may continue to play out for many working parents for years to come. We refer to this as work-family infrastructure shocks. I'm going to mostly focus on childcare shocks today, but it's really about the loss or uncertainty of how and where to work, and even the relationship shocks, which I'm not going to go into today, but that could be a totally different webinar that happened during the pandemic. But here's some examples. And as I read through some of these quotes, you might feel or recall that you experienced some of these things yourself. Here's a parent saying, we had absolutely no childcare. It's 100% of the problem. They have a 3-year-old at home, used to having preschool from 9 to 5:30, 5 days a week, and a newborn at home coming. Or just being born. And so basically it just feels like, it's never ending. Everybody's at home and it's really hard to navigate that. Others commenting on the lack or the shocks associated with not having the physical space. And again, this was during when things were shut down and when office closures came to be and people were really working remotely. But, this continues to be a challenge, particularly when childcare, makes this challenge even more difficult. So finding the physical space and the ability to concentrate when you're navigating those two things at the same time. And then also the logistical challenges and the challenges associated with bandwidth and even technology at home. So these are the kinds of things that we refer to when we talk about childcare shocks. And again, these kinds of quotes, we studied this in the context at the height of the pandemic, but these are things that continue to, for working parents to continue to navigate. So what did we study? We really sought to look at the effects of these work-family infrastructure shocks. And we conducted a very large multi-wave study, 2 points in time, with 2,500 working parents. We also interviewed more than 70 working parents, including several couples. We looked at the economic and policy impacts, so changes in employment, time use, policy availability, and utilization. We looked at mental health impacts, and we looked at work-family impacts. So I don't have a lot of time to share all of these findings, so I'm going to give you kind of a glimpse of what some of these things look like. Some of the things you may have heard before, some of them are unique to our particular study. Also, I don't have time to get into the background of the study, but I can tell you that this was a nationally represented panel study. We worked really hard to make sure that it represented what the country actually represents in terms of demographics. So let's start with the economic effects. We know that there was higher job loss among women during the pandemic. That was referred to as the she session. And we know that many women have bounced back from that now that there is more availability and things have kind of gotten back to normal. We did see higher job loss and a reduction of working hours for women more so than men. And we can directly associate that. And this is one thing that's unique about our study, is that we directly associate it with the lack or loss of childcare that happened. And so among women who became unemployed, 26% said it was due to childcare versus 14% for men. But among working parents, and this was pretty equal for men and women, they lost about 11 hours per week on average. Again, they said that this was due to lack of childcare. While many have bounced back, like I said, and returned to the workforce, the effects may be long lasting. And of course, the fears of a repeat is on the minds of so many, particularly when they see how fragile the infrastructure is. Now, some of these economic impacts also feed into the work policy effects, which we also looked at. So here we see that although 24% of working parents reported having some policies in place from their organizations, paid family leave was available, very few actually used it during the pandemic. The most common practice that was added, and the things that are listed under COVID-19 workplace practices were things that were added to or created as a result of the pandemic. The most common practice, of course, being work from home, and then followed by childcare subsidies. So only 30% of working parents actually had any form of backup care during the May-June timeframe when we initially started to collect the data. And of course, there were significant disparities between low and high income individuals. It's important to also keep in mind that, again, this is based on US workers. Only 8 states, including, actually in addition, DC as well, had enacted some form of paid leave during this time, yet only 5 states had that up and running. So that might have been supplemental to whatever organizations were offering something that may have supplemented that. But one issue that remains is, even though while companies are offering more support, again, parents were reluctant to fully utilize some of these programs for reasons that might be explained by what I mentioned before, and prior researchers have discussed, this fear of career repercussions and violating worker norms. What's interesting, though, is women were less likely to cite childcare as a reason for becoming unemployed if they had access to paid family leave through their employer, the ability to work from home, or having support from their coworkers. So on this slide, you can see how certain workplace policies actually ameliorated either job loss or reduction in hours when certain supports were available. Not necessarily when they utilized it, but when they were available, which to me tells me that just feeling supported or having the option to have some flexibility really is important. And so these informal supports, or having a manager that supports you or coworkers support you, really does make a difference, even if you don't necessarily take advantage of some of these policies. It's just having them available. So I'm going to move now to the mental health impacts. And again, I'm not going to share too much data here, but I just wanted to mention that, obviously, we saw from those headlines, a lot of them say moms are not okay, but now we're starting to see parents are not okay. It's not just the moms that are, having high psychological distress. It's also the dads as well. And you can see actually from this slide that men actually were challenged even more with parental stress, maybe because they're balancing work and family in ways that they hadn't done before, maybe seeing and living the stressors of work family for them, might be more newer, than it is for working mothers. But that's not to generalize, but that's in general what might be going on. Of course, other issues for women tend to sleep less, worry more about their jobs, probably due to that greater sense of uncertainty. And I'm going to read some quotes in a little bit that might really speak to some of these stressors that both working moms and dads are facing. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was the work-family impacts. And so one of the things, and I'm going to share this data using the qualitative findings because I think it's interesting to kind of put quotes alongside, you know, what people are actually feeling during this time, but also, you know, this lingering effect of the pandemic. So again, these are results from our qualitative findings, and you know, and what they were experiencing in terms of these shocks. And so we liken it to their experience really being very similar to what hospitals refer to as surge capacity. So this constant absorbing and attending work and family demands. You know, attending meaning the attention and energy. And by the way, this is not just logistical. This also could be just thinking about it, you know, kind of the mental load, things that are happening all the time, and then absorbing all of those things and reflecting on their roles and what resources they have or don't have. So, you know, in the medical field, surge capacity refers to the ability to evaluate and care for a markedly increased volume of patients, one that challenges or exceeds normal operating capacity. And so we use this definition to think about it in terms of surge capacity for working parents, the ability to evaluate and care for a markedly increased volume of work and family demands that either challenges or exceeds normal operating capacity, because this is, you know, crisis mode, really navigating these things on overload. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these effects look like of operating in surge capacity. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that it's not so much about the balancing of work and family roles that was going on during this time. Of course, it is a lot of that in operating in surge capacity, but it's also a lot, this is reflected a lot in the quotes that we saw about the unleashing of both that fear that I mentioned about meeting ideal work norms, and by the way, ideal parenting norms, but also at the same time, simultaneously feeling somewhat freed. So you'll see this reflected in some of the quotes. So you can see someone saying, this has already eroded my sense of self and my identity and how I view myself as a worker and also as a mom. So that's definitely going to end up having impacts that I think already started to show a little bit with my relationships, just because at the end of the day, I feel tired, a shell of a person. I feel like, you know, I was really great at my job before and really good at being a mom, and now I'm feeling really crappy at both. So there's that fear. Here's some freedom. As constructively and with little misery as possible. Here's someone whose family decided to do a happy hour, and you know, which they normally wouldn't do. They were normally picky about sugar. You know, we see this also with people allowing maybe more screen time and so forth that they wouldn't often do, but loosening up some things that they would otherwise care about. You know, so here's some freedom, at least on the parenting side. I mentioned, you know, so this is someone that had just been on the job for 3 months. So regardless of how flexible they were feeling, you know, they always felt like, you know, can I really do this? How am I going to make a strong impression? So again, that ideal work fear. And then lastly, you know, here's another example of some freedom. You know, this is from a father, you know, who's working full time, saying, you know, I really am now invested in being a good caregiver. And I do feel a little bit, you know, of regret for not working as much or doing as much, but it feels pretty good to be able to be able to do that. So, you know, these are just some interesting insights that working parents start to realize that these societal expectations really shape, you know, how they think about parenting. And, you know, they're thinking a lot about, am I a good parent? These are the kinds of questions that I'm doing. Am I a good professional? You know, how do I navigate some of those uncertainties? Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say is this is not necessarily bad news, you know, because one of the things we realized that some of this realization of the fear and freedom ultimately was a good thing, as it started to help shift their perspective. You know, they realized what they had been maybe taking for granted. They were more likely to advocate for themselves and for others, and maybe think about doing things a little bit differently. So, you know, very quickly, you know, they realized that there was some privilege with respect to, you know, I'm lucky, you know, my situation is a good one, and other people may have it far worse than me. Financially, we're okay, you know, this really puts things into perspective for me. Others talking about more as an adjustment. What am I going to do differently as a result of these shocks, you know, in terms of my work, my relationships, and my caregiving? There's some people that talked about wanting to change things up. You know, maybe it's changing a job, and we actually are seeing this a lot with the Great Resignation, you know, as a result of this. This is kind of a reflective period of what should I do differently, but then also reflecting on macro level changes, like what needs to change, even if they necessarily can't make that change themselves, but maybe advocating for it at work. You know, so here's some quotes. I'm not going to read through all of them because I know I'm running out of time here, but I know the slides are available, so those will be provided to you. And then lastly, just this reflection, you know, around, you know, maybe it's really about you know, how to think about work. It's not that people didn't want to work anymore. You know, here's someone saying, it's really hard for me to be a full-time caregiver. You know, I want to go back to work. I never felt guilty about that, even though we often, you know, assume that might be the case. You know, it's really just about being uncertain about the future and figuring out a way to really have a successful career, and also, you know, be a good parent. So the key takeaways here, and then I'm going to pass it over to Tim, is, you know, again, we might be seeing some of these effects in the Great Resignation, and maybe even with some of the boomerang effects, as people maybe think things are better in other places based on what they're feeling and why they're leaving. But they're really taking those risks for the sake of trying to achieve better work-family balance and outcomes. But the key takeaways really: work-family supports matter. We're going to hear about why that is and how that plays out in a second. That work-family perspectives are changing for individuals as a result of the pandemic, and they need to change for organizations as well. And then, you know, I wrote an article that talked about this, but we really believe that childcare needs to be seen as a business issue, not only a family issue. So I will now hand things over to Tim Allen, who will talk about what organizations are doing.
Great, thank you so much, Jamie. I really appreciate it. It's great to hear your study. I know that you've been hard at work on it and for 19 years, so doing the work. Thank you for the time. I want to appreciate everyone for having me. What I want to talk about is the intersection of what Jamie was just talking about with the business world and what we've actually been seeing. One of the trends we're seeing actually come out of COVID was it started to emerge pre-COVID. But going out of COVID, or I should say, COVID is still a factor here, but I should say as resumption has started to occur back into daily life, we've seen businesses start to command more of what we will call care benefits. And what we mean by care benefits are benefits that help support the employee base across multiple spectrums and intersections of their life, whether that's aging parents, whether that's children, or whether that's even their household responsibilities. Employees are starting to show back up, and this tends to be advocated by new employees, is what our study has found. But employees are showing up to employers and saying, look, I want to have it all. I want to have a career, but I also want to be able to have a life. And so what benefits are you willing to offer me in a spectrum of a very high employment area? Meaning that if you look at the economic data of unemployment at this point in time, employees have the upper hand at this moment. They're showing up and saying, what benefits can you provide to me in order for us to succeed together as a company? So they're looking to employers in order to provide that. And so what we've seen is the benefits landscape has evolved. Employers are starting to react to that statement given by employees or by potential employees. And you're looking at what's happening in terms of HR leaders. We did a study with over 500 HR leaders, 501 HR leaders representative nationwide. And the vast majority you see here with the data, 97% are telling us we are going to change our benefit strategy because of the pandemic. And specifically when we drill into that, they're saying we are going to change our benefit strategy, not just in mental health, not just in healthcare, but also in family care benefits, because we're seeing that when employees were working from home or in a new flex environment where people are working remote, they are having a difficult time of balancing it all. And so that is really eye-opening from our perspective, because when you have employers saying we are reevaluating everything, but specifically we are really looking to amplify this area, we perk up and take notice. And so we also asked, is this a temporal effect in terms of the pandemic, or are you going to sustain this? Do you see this being having longevity into your benefits package, your benefits overall attractiveness? And you can see over half the respondents said, this is something that we're going to do permanently. So that really gave us a lot of questions and a lot of things that we wanted to dig further into. And so as we started to dig in, and I'll share more data here in subsequent slides, we noticed businesses that actually provide care benefits have longer retention, have happier employee satisfaction, have lower recruiting costs overall. And in the majority, it's just good business, right? Most businesses that I know of, with the exception of nonprofit or educational institutions, are looking for the ROI on all things produced in terms of care benefits and what they're looking for in their employee base. And what we found is by providing care benefits, you really do retain employees for a longer period of time. When we dug into the data and we started to ask a lot of the employees on our survey, or a lot of the HR buyers on our survey regarding their employees, they cited a myriad of reasons for why they would be leaving a job. As you could read here, I won't read through all of them, but I will say I will cherry pick a few of them. You look at childcare and senior care benefits, and 48% of the people leaving have indicated that they would like that benefit, or that is a reason or one of the number of reasons why they are leaving an employer. That's compelling. If you can start to tackle a large swath of rationale for an employee leaving, you completely can reduce your recruitment costs by close to 20 to 30% just immediately. So on top of that, you also have a two-way street here that's produced by providing care benefits. It's not only for the employee, it's not only for the employer in terms of just strict ROI, you also get the support of your business objectives, furthering your mission, furthering the objective of what you are trying to accomplish inside of your business, right? As we can all, it's a trite novelty for us to say, but it is a maxim of truth, which is a happy employee base and team members produce happy results and produce more effectiveness for an organization. As you can see here, we're looking for, and there's been a number of books and a number of different HR strategies across the nation, and a number of different management philosophy books. You can't walk in or look on Amazon or look across any kind of book purchaser and not see, tens of thousands of management hacks and tricks and styles, all looking for how to produce more effective employees, how to produce better outcomes, and how to do it. And we take the position of, well, one of the fundamental things you can do is invest in your employees to give them those better outcomes. And so when we looked at the data and looked at the survey, you'll see that if you have a benefit that's aided by improved childcare or senior care, you have a healthier workforce, you have a happier workforce, you have productivity starting to shoot through the roof. You've got a more flexible work environment, and you're attracting and retaining employees. So it's this domino effect of investing in your employees and investing inside of the business that actually has ramifications across multiple venues, multiple verticals of what you're looking to achieve. And you don't have to spend the $9.95 on a book that probably is going to produce no results at all. So you save yourself that reading time and also having to waste time on a hack that doesn't necessarily produce the result. It's one of the fundamental things. And there's a different spectrum of benefits that we've seen employers start to give the employees, but really it starts with a baseline acknowledgement with a fundamental benefit of saying we will either partially subsidize, we will give some kind of dollar amount towards, or we will acknowledge that this is an issue for you and this is how we're helping to alleviate. That statement in and of itself produces significant results in the workforce. And so, when you go into the data, you can see all of the different impact points that happen across your business and across employees. So, this benefit specifically going another level down, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, you've got better productivity, 88% do that. Senior care support specifically, there is a large drumbeat with childcare, and it is a significant issue for emerging families or those who are planning to have a family. But there's also the sandwich generation here that is also impacted by having aging parents. And we see as much distress occur in not knowing what to do with a aging parent, especially parents that may be afflicted with a higher acuity need, such as dementia, vis-a-vis childcare. So I would say that everyone is distressed. But if you are hitting the double whammy jackpot of having children that you're trying to figure out while you're working full time in terms of childcare support, any kind of vehicles of success there, and then you have an aging parent, it really compounds and exponentially increases the overall distress that an employee is feeling. So we know that providing senior care support as well as child care support, you see a significant benefit in terms of the productivity that's being driven by both of those events happening. And then you also have more diversity and inclusion. As Jamie had mentioned before, you've got a real outsized impact on women in the workforce that occurred over the pandemic, right? A lot of the silent labor falls onto the mothers in a household in terms of keeping the household running, maintaining and managing the schedule, having the children all on lock, having that it's a full-time job on top of an already full-time job on top of the full-time job of actually having your children be productive and being maintained and being managed and being cared for. So you've got really, if you are a mother in a household, you have 3 full-time jobs occurring at any moment in time. And so what happens when you produce the benefit as an employer, you're able to attract a larger talent pool because you are alleviating the stress valve or the kind of abject fear that most parents have, especially women in the workforce, of how to have everything handled in terms of responsibilities. And it's incredible, the data as we've gone through it, and I am fortunate to be very close to a group of individuals who, not just employees of Care.com, but I also have panels of consumers of Care.com. I'm able to actually speak to them and understand not only do they manage their 3 full-time jobs, but they do it with a smile and they do it with more grace than anyone who I could have ever imagined. I, as a CEO of an organization, have 1 full-time job. I have 2 twin boys, and I can tell you that's another full-time job. But I will tell you that, like, if I had a 3rd full-time job, which is managing all of the different aspects of running the household and doctor's appointments, dentists, getting everything done, getting this, like all of that stuff, I would crumble. So to the mothers out there, that is my hat tip to you, that you are incredible and you're doing an incredible job, but you need support and benefits, and that is what employers are starting to look and do. It also, by the way, predominantly impacts, in the data that we've looked at, helping more African American and more ethnicities actually enter the workforce as well. Because when you start to talk about access points, there's the mothers or fathers who are looking for not only having access to the benefit of childcare, access to the benefit of senior care for the aging parent, but then when you get into the access points of socioeconomic factors, it adds another limitation as well. So you get actually a double unlock by adding care benefits to your employee benefit package, by not only getting a more diverse gender mix in terms of your employees and setting everyone off on an equal footing, but you also get to start to break apart socioeconomic factors that come into play that limit full-time employees from actually joining the workforce. And then if you look at this, what we actually saw is this has become a competitive tool for recruiting. It's pretty common sense. It's something that you would come to the conclusion of, but there's hard data behind it, which is when you have an attractive employee who you're trying to bring into your organization, this plays a huge factor, meaning that care benefits play a huge factor in their decision-making process. They look at the organization. They not only are looking with a social mission of, does the company stand for me, which is one of the first vectors that we've noticed employees go through. They're also looking at, do they actually back up what they say? And so by adding care benefits, you now have employees who are looking across the spectrum, and if they're competing for 2 different job offers, it will tip their hand in favor of looking to the benefit package that is going to be more advantageous for them in their lives. So, you've got 96% of people who are paying attention to their competitors' benefit packages. So you've got employees that are already internal to you, looking and making sure that they're paying attention to what competitors are offering and if they want to jump ship or if they want to solicit other offers there. But then you also have inbound new employees that you're attracting that you want to make sure you have the most competitive offer in front of them at all points in time. And so they're here to stay. Care benefits are here to stay. While the pandemic, had different various waves of surge, of ebb and flow, what has happened with care benefits in the conversation topic is that it continues today. As Jamie mentioned with the headlines and the articles of mothers continuing to feel distress or parents continuing to feel that abject fear of not knowing what to do, they haven't subsided. They haven't actually gone to the wayside. It hasn't been since schools have resumed that you've started to see parents have a sigh of relief and go, oh, all is good now. If anything, with remote working, configurable care, where you have to determine how many times you need someone, it's not necessarily a 9 to 5. You may need a different variety of caregivers. What we found is this conversation topic is actually becoming even more of one that's in the mainstream of the lexicon versus it becoming subsiding into what I will call a secondary conversation, which had been in the existence since the 1960s. We've been talking about childcare since the 60s, You know, as parents have had to figure out how to get their children picked up from a farming system, which I call the school system, because at the end of the day, schools end at 3 o'clock here or 2 o'clock in other areas. And I don't know a single parent whose job used to go from 8 to 2 on the majority en masse. While there's some parents out there, the majority do not do that. So parents have always had to figure out configurable care, but now with the new remote structures, what's ended up happening is it's become mainstream conversation, and you've had more parents who are vigilant about trying to figure out a sustainable solution versus it being a passive solution that existed previously. And so if you look at the data, what we actually were able to pull together is how many people were offering caregiver benefits and child care benefits or senior care benefits on an annualized basis. And if you can see, we in 2020, child care benefits were just about at 40%. We've exceeded 40% that were planned to offer in 2021. And then what actually did end up happening in 2021 is you had 50% start to offer a child care benefit. Senior care saw the outsized gain here in terms of benefit offering. What was interesting is, on senior care is, a lot of the headlines are again about child care, but when you start to look at aging parents, you had this workforce that had used to sit in silence and contend with the graceful aging of a parent or not so graceful aging with a parent, as was my case. And so you then have to, address that. It becomes an employer problem because they're not able to separate work from life in a remote environment where they're working from home. So it became more prevalent and more prominent in the conversation overall. And so they're going to continue to add. More employers, just like you, are going to continue to add these benefits in every life stage. We have a lot of employers that are looking not only for what they can do for employees and families with children and with parents, but what to do for the, millennial generation or the generations that are emerging that may not yet have children. Fertility, IVF, family planning, things to that effect. Those benefits are really starting to emerge, and they're starting to emerge en masse. And so we continue to think that this will happen and continue at scale. And then old assumptions continue to go out the door. One of the things that this spotlighted, and one of the most interesting data pieces is on this slide that I found was, 1 in 4 caregivers to the elderly is actually a millennial. So as I mentioned before, they're offering benefits that not only appease to what may be considered family or considered the family age spectrum, but also the younger generations that are now getting tasked with the duties and responsibilities of, one, helping their aging parent. A lot of adults, I am the byproduct of this, had children at a later age, and so they were much younger. I'm not a millennial. I wish I was, but what I would say is, a lot of children are now having to take care. A lot of younger adults are having to take care of aging parents at this point in time. So a lot of younger kids were born at a certain point in time that created this broad spectrum in the age range and gap that the benefits now apply to a larger swath of employees versus it just being minimalized to a certain age group or a certain vector. And it goes on the inverse too. A lot of grandparents are starting to take care of their grandchildren. And a lot of family members in this state of not knowing what to do with childcare are looking to family members in terms of how they can take care of their children or becoming the supplement in terms of childcare. So we're starting to look and see with employers of how do you not only help the employee with a subsidy in terms of childcare, but how can the employee help their immediate family members? Is it a reimbursement program that applies to qualified caregivers? And qualified caregivers can also be an immediate family member as well. A lot of employers are actually playing with that dialogue right now and trying to understand what it means to be a caregiver and be the primary provider of caregiving, whether it's direct caregiving or whether it's secondary caregiving by helping to supplement your parents in a lot of ways. So you look at that and you say, a lot of these old assumptions that you would play with are now being thrown out the door, and a lot of them are getting actually highlighted because of the pandemic. And it's all about flexibility. A lot of employers, as you know, are adopting a flexible schedule, a flexible remote environment. A lot are offering hybrid work environments. I think the jury is still out on what that will look like in the future. That a lot of people have tried to predict, and a lot of people have turned around and had to pivot. And I think it is a time of pivoting in terms of what the workforce looks like and the work environment looks like. I think there will be a lot of stress testing on different assumptions. I think you will see a lot of employees, whether they want to go full-time back in office or whether they want to stay remote, and see what that does to the dynamics of retention in the workforce. But what I can tell you is flexibility, no matter what, is now going to be in the environment of employment, especially for the white-collar workers of America. So what that means is that care benefits are going to come to stay, because they're going to need something that supplements and helps that flexibility and continues to go in that way. As you could imagine, employees do have a bias towards wanting flexible benefits versus ones that are like more rigid and locked. For a long time, it used to be that you would take a child to a daycare center or a child care center that was 9 to 5, or you would have an on-site child care center. And those, we have found with employers, are becoming a little passé in terms of a benefit. While they will still continue to stay, daycare centers are not going to go anywhere. Some parents will want to continue to leverage that. A lot of parents are looking for centers that will allow them to take their child from noon to 5, or take a child from 8 to 3. So there's a lot of configurable care that's being attempted in terms of not only in the home, but also out of the home, and the supplement that's provided there as well. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your time. And I want to turn it back over to Jamie, and I appreciate all of the information I could share. Or Mackenzie, I should say.
Thank you so much, Tim, Jamie. If you both want to come on camera, we're going to take a few minutes to do some Q&A and hear what people want to talk about here. Awesome. Good to see you. So hi, everyone. Really, really pertinent and insightful conversation. So I really appreciate the presentations you both gave, and want to just dig into some questions. We have a few here. First, I think maybe Jamie, just to start and kind of back up to some of your methodology. I'm curious about if you could describe a little bit about your studies. Are these dependent on surveys? And if so, someone was curious the size of the surveys you're running. And I'm curious too, in terms of scope of your interviews, and if there's anything ongoing in the work that you're doing and starting to see kind of, I'm hesitant to say post-COVID trends, but kind of post-COVID trends in what's happening now and how that differs. So a lot embedded in there, but maybe just a couple minutes to walk us through your methodology would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure. It was kind of interesting because as soon as the pandemic began, there was a interdisciplinary group of scholars at Northeastern. So it was me in the business school, and we had someone in public policy and economics, and someone who was a mental health expert in sociology. So you can see where I would call the survey at one point, I called it the kitchen sink survey, because we wanted to ask everything about what working parents were going through. And it's interesting because, well, so I will tell you that the first thing we did was we put this out on social media, and we got 900 responses from this large survey, and it was long. That's why I said kitchen sink survey long. But these parents really wanted to, and I've been studying parents for a long time, and I find it fascinating that they want to talk, because these issues are so important, and they're willing to do. In the interviews, we actually, when we put this out on social media, of the 900 or so people that initially said they would fill it out, about half of them also said that they wanted to be interviewed. We couldn't do all those interviews. We didn't have the capacity, but to me, it just speaks, and I know that the situation was far more dire than that, but even when we did the follow-up, so then we did, one of the issues with the social media survey was that we didn't get the representation, which is why we ended up doing the panel study that gave us that representation. Even though I think that the end all be all of the data really speaks to the same thing, the things that I talked about, the things that Tim talks about. It's really interesting to see, I will just say, the alignment of, we asked individuals. We didn't talk to employers. Tim surveys employers, and yet they're saying the exact same things. There's so much alignment there, which is great, because I think it used to be just the other way around, or not that employers wanted to do something, but it's funny because I'm looking on my other screen seeing the Dow plummeting, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to the future of these benefits. Hopefully, as Tim said, they're what did you say? They're really mainstream now. They're not secondary. So I'm hoping that they don't get cut as we enter, and hopefully don't enter a recession.
Great, thank you.
So, and by the way, yes, we do have ongoing data. We're actually started looking at reentry,
Okay.
what's happening to people who are physically moving back into the workplace, or maybe haven't quite yet, and they're still kind of hanging out in this remote space. And we're looking at the mixed messaging that they're getting also from employers saying, come back, wait, don't come back, wait, you have a choice. No, you don't have a choice. And some of the stress that is, part of that experience.
And there's some interesting new benefits that, I mean, I almost want to use air quotes for benefits when I hear from a client that, oh, well, if we come into the office on Wednesday, we're getting smoothies and puppies to hang out with, and there are this whole host of different incentives to bring people in person to bring back that face time. That's really interesting. In addition to, as you both alluded to, the flexibility, the opportunity for hybrid work, and the things that make more of a material impact, I think, on our lives. And maybe, not to say that petting puppies isn't wonderful, and I fully support that, and wish I could have made it into their offices for that. But I'm curious, Tim, as someone who's specifically looking at the organizational level, we had a question from an audience member, and I think, I don't know if it's easy to put our finger on this. Do we have a sense of how many employees, like percentage-wise, on average, working for an organization do need childcare support, like have families and would be after those types of benefits? Like, are we looking at 50% of a workforce? Do you see sectors or demographic areas where that's going to vary? Or, is there any kind of benchmark that we can work from as we start to think about what this means for organizations thinking about offering benefits specifically to parents and other caregivers?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would say, given the spectrum of company size, right? Like, you've got small, medium businesses that come anywhere from 1 to 2 employees all the way through to a couple hundred, a couple thousand. And then you've got the large conglomerates that are anywhere from 10, 50, 100,000 employees, right? I would say when you look at when you break it out into the dimensions of that, right? You would imagine you have a lot smaller necessity in terms of smaller businesses, right? You have probably more of a liquidity or what I would call a dynamic of play here. If it's a 2-person shop, for example, in order to hit the 50% mark, one of them would be having a child, right? So it's like that dynamic where you look at it and you go, it does break out by size of organization. What we've benchmarked to is around 20 to 30% of employees at any moment in time need childcare in a large conglomerate. But what's interesting is you have anywhere from 40 to 50% who need an aging parent benefit. Because everyone has parents and everyone has parents' age, right? There's just those dynamics at play, right? While there's a choice to be had in terms of having children, every working adult has a parent somewhere, right? In terms of whatever the relational factor is. So you see a higher spectrum of need on senior care or elder care than you do on child care, but they're still pretty massive inside of a workforce. In terms of where we see it more predominantly, it's really interesting. If you look at the white collar jobs all the way through to the what we will call the hourly labor workforce jobs, right? If you have a warehouse worker, for example, in Maryland, who's working at one of the large retailer warehouses and cannot work from home, has to be at the office. What we saw during the pandemic was really interesting. The demand really outweighed in that sector vis-a-vis the white collar sector, right? You had more parents who were able to work within their schedule, stay at home, really be able to take care of their children, work from home. And then you would find that, you had restaurateurs, or you had waitresses, wait staff, you had labor forces that were working in warehouses where they had to physically be present. And that really actually outpaced in terms of overall demand. So it does vary by sector, but it really varies dependent upon job type as well. And I would say that's the access point that we have. I do want to add in, we just released our cost of care survey, which is what we do annually. And we found that over, it's crazy. Over 50% of families are spending more than 20% of their household income on childcare right now. And so you can think of it in the same dynamics of job type, where that may be more palatable with a white collar worker who's making substantially more dollars vis-a-vis a warehouse worker who's making an hourly wage and trying to make ends meet. So if they're spending 20% of their household income, the economic impact is felt a lot more significantly there. So you have a lot of these dynamics at play, but I would say on the very long-winded answer to say it can vary anywhere from 20 to 50% in terms of the percentiles, depending on what type of workforce and what type of care is needed.
Can I ask you a question? Because I quoted your survey from maybe it was 2020 or 2021, about 10%, that this cost of childcare was about 10%. And so has that increased? It doubled?
Yeah,
wow.
So 50% of it, we just released it yesterday. 50% of families are spending more than 20% of their income at this moment in time.
It's incredible, because the one thing we didn't talk about are single parents too.
Yeah.
So, that is, an increasing challenge, of course.
Yeah. it was mind blowing. You know, I saw the data, and now that we just published it, it blew my mind, right? Because you've had this inflationary. Now you can get into the macroeconomic factors of, is it inflation, but you really have had a wage inflation and a cost inflation across daycares and nannies and babysitters. You know, I don't know if you guys saw the Wall Street Journal article, but there are some babysitters now commanding $30 an hour, and they are so high in demand that parents are like, I will give you $30 an hour, plus I will, like, you know, give you a dinner, plus I will pay for your transportation here and there. Like, it is like they are able to command the benefits of this employment factor, this labor market that we're currently in right now. To your point, Jamie, I don't know how recession will play into all of that, right? I don't know if it starts to meet in the middle somewhere, but I do have this like fundamental belief something has to give for the parent, especially single parents, if they're spending 20% of their household income on childcare.
Yeah.
Wow, that is.
Allison, can I mention one other thing that came to mind when we were, it was when Tim was talking, but I was thinking about the idea of the stigma associated with being a caregiver, right? And where that is often fallen on, it's the working mother, and, you know, we could make an argument that maybe it's better for one parent to stay home, and, you know, there's all of that, those discussions about the mommy wars and so forth. But I think the definition of care, like Tim was saying, it's so much bigger than just childcare. You know, there's elder care. There's also caregiving of, you know, people who are sick. You might be caring for a sick spouse or a sick child, or you yourself might become sick. So the idea of care is so much more than, you know, than just childcare. So I think if we think about it more broadly, we can reduce the stigma of why it might have felt like, well, people have a choice if they want to work or not. Well, that's actually not always the case, but we often assume that is the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was wondering actually, and I specifically was thinking about that, is specifically looking at Tim's talk beforehand about, you do talk about, okay, the number of millennials who are taking care of aging parents, the grandparents who might be raising children, you know, and those are just more, you know, person-to-person care. But as you're talking about, Jamie, too, just extenuating life circumstances that cause things to need to happen. And in our constrained world where everything is logistically much harder, you know, that gets magnified. And I wonder, are you starting to see any trends, Tim? It's probably more of a question for you at the organizational level with, you know, how are organizations thinking about offering benefits to different types of caregivers? Like, are there, you know, 'cause you're also playing within the rules of regulation and restriction, and, you know, you can't consider certain people immediate family. And so for some organizations, they can't offer bereavement to those types of family member, you know, on behalf of them, but they can for immediate. So, you know, are there any shifts happening there where organizations are thinking creatively about how to offer these benefits? Or, you know, imagine that it's a pie chart. Are they taking the slice that they could give to a parental caregiver and figuring out a way to allocate that same type of benefit to someone who might have a different care need, but it's still, to your points, you know, extremely valid?
Yeah. You know, what I love about Jamie's data and having the opportunity to stare at it before we got on the call, Jamie's work is just always opens my eyes to many things and makes me do deeper thinking myself, right? And I'm immersed in this at all points in time. But really having the data from the perspective of the individual, to Jamie's point, versus the organization really does illuminate a lot of things for me. And the thing that I've commonly found that I always seem to, for some reason, it falls out of my lexicon, like I just forget it over time and I don't know why, is caregiving is so personal. Like, it really is so unique to the individual versus it being an en masse one size fits all. And what we started to find is we are in this definitional period. If I look at it from the organization lens, we're in this definitional period. And what I mean by that is organizations are trying to define what is care. What is care for my employee? What is the spectrum of care? How far do I go? Right? You know, and that runs the gamut from, we have employers that are currently in the quandary of, do I provide pet care? Because our pets, you know, pets are in many ways considered family members to a lot of employees, right? But they may not have children. Do I provide elder care, right? What is the impact points of what's happening? And they look at it all with this lens of what is occurring inside of the organization that either provides ROI or better longevity or retention. And so this definitional period is really foundational, and I'm glad we're all in this inquisition of what's happening here. But I would say no one knows. Like, really, it really is so unique to the employee and the organizational culture, I should say, that, like, it's not like one of those things where I can go, here's the menu, you should choose, right? Like I have to sit down with organizations and my team sit down with organizations and we define for them what's going on. It brings up a thought, and I don't want to eat up too much time, but I have a good friend who's stationed overseas, like working overseas for a large tech company. And his mother was recently diagnosed with dementia in South Carolina, and has no siblings, single mother, never remarried. And so really, he was calling me and going, "What do I do? Like, what does my company benefit offer? What's my long-term care insurance?" And fortunately, he works for a large tech company that had figured out some of these things. And so I'm helping him navigate those benefits and go, okay, here's what you should do. Here's how you should take care. From 5,000 miles away from where his mother is, he's making these decisions and these calls. And it just really highlights how organizations have to take care of not just one use case of a child or having children or being part of a nuclear family or any of those things, but a myriad of use cases that have so many complexities behind them. So sorry, again, a long-winded answer for me to say, I think organizations are really having to define it to the individual in order for it to matter on the macro.
And if I could just add, I think that's a really interesting point too, because like even with our data that shows that even if you just offer the supports, even if people don't take it, that feeling of knowing that it's there, or that it probably really comes down to, is my manager going to help me out if I, because you're right, there's no one size fits all strategy for anybody, which doesn't mean you don't offer the policies, because people need the blanket policies, but they have to be modified, to and tailored for, people's individual needs, which, vary considerably.
You hit the nail on it. Like he had never, I can promise you with 100% certainty, he had never explored the elder care benefit his employer had offered until the moment you need it, right? And you're in this moment of crisis where you're going, oh my gosh, my mom is not able to, she was attempting to drive and get lost, right? Her friends were calling him and going, hey, she's in the Safeway parking lot, getting lost. And so he's like, it's a crisis moment. And so now he's going to go find out he has the benefit, right? But to your point, Jamie, it's like the insurance policy. You don't really think about your insurance every day. I know I don't wake up and I'm like, my home insurance is great. I'm not, but you're really glad you have it when you need it. You know what I'm saying? And that's what these benefits start to offer to the individuals. A psychological safety that if something were to happen, something's going on, they need to make a life decision, they have the tools and the access that they need. I agree.
You're starting to see that right in your data of employers rather looking at what their competitors do. So we've got that level of consciousness. Are we seeing a shift? This might be an interesting research question for your respondent pool, Jamie, of what individuals are looking for. Are they evaluating these types of packages as they consider making moves, especially because we keep hearing it's an employees market. They've got so much choice about where they can work, what they can do, and organizations are struggling to find and retain talent. To what, again, I'm back to a pie chart analogy, but imagine this whole job and what percentage, of their consideration is, well, what kind of ancillary benefits, and maybe we shouldn't even call them ancillary benefits anymore, but what these types of benefits, how much of a role do they play in my consideration of a future employer? Because to your point, you don't think about some of them, but certain things, or you've had one experience, so then 6 months later you say, okay, I'm changing jobs, and now I've really got to think about, what type of, who can I take to a doctor's appointment under my organization's HR policy? What I have at MIT is quite different than what my prior organization had, in a positive way, so great. But, you just start to realize, I didn't know what I'd need from a bereavement benefit until I had to attend a funeral and found, well, you got to take vacation for this one. Okay, I'm not going to not go, so definitely. We just have a minute left, but I did want to ask this question. I'm sorry to kind of beat the drum of the management implications and organizational implications, but for my interest in our audiences, we focus on, what are the takeaways? What can managers do? And I'm curious if you have any parting thoughts on, keeping flexibility at the forefront, inclusive benefits, making sure that you're really giving employees what they need to have that time for care and self-care. How do you see any specific strategies or creative ways that organizations can think about doing that while maintaining and enhancing even productivity? Because what I get concerned about with anything going on post-COVID is, people are working from everywhere. There's a lot less direct oversight maybe of what's happening. Any thoughts about how organizations can continue to maintain the productivity and the output they need while still offering the flexibility and the benefits that they really ought to be offering to their employees.
I'm happy to take it. You know, where this parlays really well with Jamie's data is when she said people are now having this conversation, right? And what I feel like is for a long time, this conversation wasn't safe. It wasn't a safe conversation. It wasn't something you would walk into an employer and go, I'm crumbling. like I got the kids, I got the job, I've got the at home, like I'm falling apart. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic or dire as that, right? But I think even in the subtle ways this conversation and context is coming up from an individual level, I actually think organizations really have to facilitate that conversation. And I think that one of the things that employers can do in terms of making sure it's a productivity and an ROI positive is to really get into the mind. Like, you know, there's a lot of mom EROs or ERGs, whatever, you know, the employee resource groups out there that are starting to form. I really think it's important for employers to get into the mindset of the employee and understand what the silent killers are. I call them the silent killers because these are still taboo topics to talk about in society. A lot of women don't want to talk about it, and from a perspective, this is just from direct conversations I've had and ancillary, you know, data gathering we've done. They don't want to have the conversation because they're afraid it will stymie their career growth, and that's exactly what Jamie had pointed to, right? They're afraid it will actually impact their ability to progress. You know, there's a lot of decisions and a lot of psychological factors that come into the safety of having the conversation. So one of the key takeaways I always encourage employers to do is figure out how you can get underneath the skin of the employee and understand the silent killers, not just what they're saying to you, because a lot of this stuff sits in the background. And that's my big key thing, which is if you unlock what's actually hindering them on the holistic, not just with the individual tasks they need to do in their employment, you will start to unlock the productivity that you're looking for. And I think that takes a lot of conversation. So I'd say that from the organization perspective.
Well said, thank you. I will end right there. We're a little bit over time. I thank everyone for staying with us a little bit long, but just want to close out and thank again our sponsor for today's session, Northeastern University's DeMoore McKim School of Business. Again, like to thank our speakers, Jamie and Tim, for taking the time to share these insights with us, and please continue to look out for their research and their work in this space as we grapple with these issues. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
See you. Thank you.
Bye. Good to see you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Jamie. Good to see you.
Good to see you.